What's going on, guys? I'm CFB Kings, and welcome back to another episode of the CFBKings Show. Really appreciate you tuning in today. We are currently, right now, in one of the greatest weeks of the entire year. Week 1 is so close, and we're about to have 5 consecutive days of college football. It's going to be awesome. Week 0 was a blast, and we've already had a top 10 team go down. I think we very well may see a couple more fall this week. Week 1 has several high-profile matchups and tons of under-the-radar games that'll be very entertaining as well, and we're going to be previewing all those games in today's episode. But before we get started, I just wanted to say a quick thank you for the growth across really every platform lately. YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, they've all been doing great, and it's been fun getting to interact with a lot of new people. So if you currently aren't, make sure to subscribe here if you're watching on YouTube, follow if you're on Spotify, and make sure to follow CFB Kings on Twitter and Instagram. Week 1 has almost arrived, one of my favorite weeks of the calendar year, and we've got college football Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. All the offseason talk is done, and we finally get to see how all these programs will look in 2024. One of the biggest matchups in Week 1 will be taking place in Gainesville, Florida, between the number 19 Miami Hurricanes and the Florida Gators. Kickoff is at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on ABC. The Canes are a 2.5-point favorite, and the over-under is 53.5, giving us a projected score of around 28-25 or 28-26 Miami. So this is a game that has enormous implications for the trajectories of each program. Not that a loss will make the losing team fall apart or anything, but what the momentum from winning this game can do for one of these programs cannot be understated. Miami has expectations and goals for the 2024 season that they haven't seen in South Florida in a very long time. Washington State transfer Cam Ward at quarterback, Oregon State transfer Damian Martinez at running back, two of the hottest commodities in the portal last cycle, a loaded wide receiver room, a stacked defense with multiple returning stars, the best kicker in the country, tons of media projections for Miami to be in the ACC title game, win the ACC title game, be in the college football playoff, and everything seems to be coming together for this year to be a turning point for the Miami program. Ever since Mario Cristobal took over as head coach for Miami, things have been kind of pointing toward 2024 being the year where it could get real for the Canes, and it certainly feels that way now. But in the very first game of the season, they have to travel not only on the road to one of their rivals, but to a rival who has one of the most hostile environments in our sport. The Swamp will be electric on Saturday, and no matter how good a visiting team is, it's always hard to win there. Florida is a team who people have spent a lot of the offseason talking about, but almost all of that talk has just been about Florida's schedule and how hard it is. Very few people, and I've tried my best to offer an alternative, but very few people have actually talked about Florida's roster and truly how good it can be this year. They returned quarterback 1 in Graham Mertz, added a 5-star in DJ Lagway behind him. They returned their starting running back in Montrell Johnson. They get back a running back from injury in Cam Carroll. They return their leader in receiving touchdowns from last season in Eugene Wilson. He's a player who could really have a breakout season this fall. They returned their starting tight end in Arliss Boardingham. Their defense is loaded. They brought in several notable transfers and recruits, especially on the defensive line in Joey Slackman from Penn. They got 5-star edge LJ McCray. He's a recruit in the 2024 class, I think the number 4 overall recruit. Linebacker, they're loaded too, a bunch of 4-star recruits and a couple solid transfers. And they're going to be a team that a lot of people have talked about, but not in a way that is really indicative of how Florida could perform this season on the field. Head coach Billy Napier is heading into his 3rd season with the Gators. He's got 2 years to look back at, learn from, make any changes from mistakes he made in the past, and that crowd is really going to be charged up in Gainesville too. First game of the season, a rival coming into their stadium. It's a game that I can really see going either way. I think because it's in Gainesville, I'm going to end up taking Florida to defeat number 19 Miami. Under Napier, they've had this pattern of beating a highly ranked or notable opponent at home early in the season. In Week 1 of 2022, they beat number 7 Utah at home. In Week 3 last year, they beat number 11 Tennessee at home. And I think in 2024, they'll continue that trend with a win over number 19 Miami. One of the other must-watch games of Week 1 is number 14 Clemson taking on number 1 Georgia in Atlanta. The Dogs are currently a 14-point favorite. Over-under is 49.5. Projected score around 32-18 Georgia. That's a noon kickoff on ABC, and it'll be one of the most highly anticipated, one of the most watched, and biggest games of Week 1. This is a game that I've spoken about a few times throughout the offseason on Twitter and Instagram, but even in past episodes of the show. And I just don't agree with what the sportsbooks in Vegas are projecting for this game. I made a season preview for Clemson earlier this summer, and in it I talked about how the Tigers went 9-4 last year, but really what it took for that to happen. They had the youngest roster in the country, with freshmen taking nearly 4,000 combined snaps. They had their projected wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 go down in Antonio Williams and Cole Turner. They had several statistical anomalies, like things happening that had never occurred in their program's history last season. They missed a chip shot field goal that would have beaten eventual ACC champion Florida State. And with all of that, they bordered on a 10-win season. One of their biggest weaknesses last year was wide receiver. They get their top 2 guys from 2022 back in Antonio Williams and Cole Turner, and then added 5-star recruit TJ Moore and 4-star recruit Bryant Wesco. Cade Klubnik is going into his 3rd season with the Tigers, his 2nd season in offensive coordinator Garrett Riley's system. They get back their starting running back in Phil Maffa, starting tight end in Jake Brenningstool. Clemson is projected by PFF, Pro Football Focus, to have the best linebacker unit in the country. They're always solid on the defensive line, where they get 2023 5-star recruit Vic Burley back from injury. He missed all of last year after suffering an injury in fall camp, so that's basically like adding another 5-star defensive lineman to their 2024 class. They return Peter Woods and TJ Parker, 2 of the best young defensive linemen in the country. And overall, Clemson has a lot more than what most people know. Georgia, the number 1 team in the country, is loaded like they have been lately. The Dogs return starting quarterback Carson Beck, who is among the top preseason Heisman contenders. They got transfer running back Trevor Etienne from Florida and transfer wide receiver Colby Young from Miami. 2 very, very good additions. They did lose guys like tight end Brock Bowers, who is one of the best tight ends in college football history. They lost wide receivers Ladd McConkey, who was clutch for them throughout his entire career, Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, and Ra Thomas. Those 3 guys, combined with Bowers, were 4 of their top 5 in receiving last year, combining for 2,100 yards and 15 touchdowns. So they did lose a good bit of production at wide receiver, but they got guys like Colby Young and London Humphreys and a couple recruits to kind of help supplement that. At running back, they lost their top 2 rushers in Kendall Milton and Dejon Edwards, who accounted for over 1,600 yards and 27 touchdowns together. So they lost solid production there, but brought in ETN to help fill that gap. 24/7 recently shared their 2024 talent composite ratings, which shows who has the most talented rosters in the country. And in that list, Georgia was number 2 and Clemson was number 5. So 2 extremely talented teams, and some of the best players in the country will be on the field Saturday in Atlanta. Like I said a minute ago, I've just had a feeling about this game throughout the entire offseason where I do not think Clemson is a 14-point underdog. I think this will be a very tight, very competitive game, and to be honest, I wouldn't be totally shocked if the Tigers won it outright. I'd say the most likely outcome is that Clemson covers and Georgia wins, but I really can't see the final score going either way. On Saturday night, we have number 7 Notre Dame going on the road to Kyle Field to take on number 20 Texas A&M. The Aggies are a 3-point favorite, so factoring in a couple points that are usually allotted for home field advantage and home environment, Vegas is basically saying that this would be about a toss-up at a neutral site. The over-under is 46.5, so with that 3-point spread, we're looking at an implied score of about 25-22 Texas A&M, probably something more practical like 24-21. This is a massive game for both programs, but if Notre Dame is able to get past Texas A&M and start their season off with a ranked road win, the rest of their schedule is pretty manageable. I made a video earlier in the summer about Notre Dame and how they have the highest chance of any team to go undefeated this year, according to the ESPN FPI at 15.8%. And if they win this game on Saturday, that percentage is going to make a significant jump. After week 1, Notre Dame plays just 2 true road games the rest of the year. They go to Texas A&M on Saturday, and then after that, they have true road games at just Purdue in week 3 and USC in week 12. They have a bunch of neutral site games. They get Florida State at home, they get Louisville at home, and in terms of preseason rankings, Texas A&M is their second toughest opponent of the season. So the Irish lost quarterback Sam Hartman, but brought in Duke transfer Riley Leonard. They return 2 of the best defensive backs in the country in Xavier Watts and Benjamin Morrison, and overall have another very talented roster and some serious CFP aspirations. And something to remember about Notre Dame for this season is that for the 12-team college football playoff, Notre Dame has no conference title to win, so they can never get one of those top 4 seeds with an auto bid, and everything they do is for an at-large spot. So if they're able to get out of College Station with a win, that'll go a long way for their CFP resume, and the Irish could be in for a big season. For Texas A&M, this is Mike Elko's first game as head coach with the Aggies. If you've been out of the loop, Elko was Duke's head coach last year. He led them to a 4-0 start. They beat number 9 Clemson in week 1. Duke hosted their very first college game day last year. The Blue Devils were ranked as high as number 16, which is tied for their highest AP ranking since 1971. So he really turned things in the right direction for that program and now looks to do so for the Aggies. Before his time in Durham, Elko was Texas A&M's defensive coordinator from 2018 to 2021, so he's very familiar with College Station and the program. Under him, their defense allowed just 15.9 points per game, which was third best in the country in his last season there as defensive coordinator in 2021, so it'll be interesting to see if he can get them back to that level. A game within the game to watch is former Duke quarterback Riley Leonard, now with Notre Dame, going against his former coach, Mike Elko, now with Texas A&M in the very first game since they both left Duke. So that'll be cool to watch if Elko can dial up some plays to contain Leonard. This game reminds me a lot of Texas A&M's season opener in 2018 when it was Jimbo Fisher's first game as head coach there. There was a new energy around the program. They were hosting number 2 Clemson and very nearly beat the Tigers in that game. I think Clemson won like 28-26 or something, which is right around the score that this one's projected to be at too. So it'll be exciting to see how this one plays out in that regard. A couple weeks ago, the Aggies lost running back Ruben Owens for the season. He was a 5-star in the class of 2023 and was a dynamic playmaker for them last season as a freshman. They do return their leading rusher in Amari Daniels and Le'Veon Moss as well, so they'll be all right, but that is a decent blow depth-wise. They returned Connor Wigman at quarterback. He was their starter at the beginning of last year and threw for 979 yards and 8 touchdowns before suffering a season-ending injury in week 4. So he was a 5-star in the class of 2022 and has a very, very high ceiling. So if he can stay healthy, that offense has a ton of potential. This is a game that I really have no strong feel on one way or the other. Texas A&M gets the home game at Kyle Field. It's one of the best environments in all of college football, but it is their first game under a new coach. I think Notre Dame has the more experienced team, the more experienced roster in these types of major games. Marcus Freeman is 1-0 head-to-head against Mike Elko. Notre Dame beat Duke in Durham last season, but that was a very close game where the Irish needed a 4th and 16 conversion, I think, late in the game. So I really have no lean, but I probably won't bet it. But for prediction's sake, I'll take the Fighting Irish to get out of there with a win. On Sunday night, standalone game, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on ABC. We have the number 23 USC Trojans taking on the number 13 LSU Tigers at a neutral site in Las Vegas. LSU is a 4.5-point favorite. Over-under is 63.5, so that gives us an implied score of 34-30 LSU. I feel like this could be one of the most entertaining games of week 1, at least from an offense and scoring perspective, because it definitely has one of the highest projected point totals and 2 teams whose offenses were electric last year, but the defense was nearly non-existent. So the biggest question, of course, for both teams, and this has been a question for USC and Lincoln Riley's teams in general for a while now, but has anything been figured out on the defensive side of the ball? And it feels like a game where the team that forces a turnover or makes one big defensive stop can win it. This is a really unique game just looking at the quarterbacks alone. From last year's teams, LSU lost a Heisman Trophy winner in Jaden Daniels, and USC lost a Heisman Trophy winner in Caleb Williams. LSU now has Garrett Nussmeier, and USC has Miller Moss. This will be Garrett Nussmeier's first season starting for the Tigers, but he's a senior. He's played in 18 different games for the Tigers. He's thrown for 1,720 yards and 11 touchdowns in those limited stints of playing time. So first season as a starter, but he's been around for a minute. Then USC has Miller Moss. He burst onto the scene last year when Caleb Williams opted out of the Holiday Bowl. Moss got the start and casually went in and threw for 372 yards and 6 touchdowns. His 6 passing touchdowns are the most in a bowl game in USC and Pac-12 history, as well as the Holiday Bowl itself's history. He became a well-known name in college football pretty quickly at the end of last season with that performance, and now it's just a matter of seeing if he can do things like that again with the roster around him in 2024. Like the Texas A&M Notre Dame game, this is one that I'm pretty unsure of pick-wise. I probably won't have any money on it. It's a neutral site, but it's in Las Vegas, quote-unquote neutral site, so it's definitely an easier setup for USC. Not sure how much that'll really affect things, but The only thing that has me worried about picking LSU is that in each of the last 2 years, they've lost their season opener, both also at neutral sites and both times to Florida State. So week 1 hasn't been kind to LSU lately. It'll be an interesting matchup between Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly, but I do think LSU has the better team this season. So who knows? Maybe they're due to win one of these neutral site openers eventually. I'll take LSU to defeat USC. One of the other major games in week 1 is number 8 Penn State at West Virginia. This one could get very interesting, and I think it'd be a close game deep into the fourth quarter. The Nittany Lions are an 8.5 point favorite. Over-under is 51.5. Implied score of around 30 to 22 Penn State. So just about a one-possession game there, well within reach for an underrated West Virginia squad. They'll be at home in front of what will likely be one of the most energized environments they've had there in a while. It's a rivalry game. They're hosting a top 10 opponent, and it should be a good one. The Mountaineers lost to Penn State by 23 last year. It was 38 to 15, but that was with the Nittany Lions scoring a touchdown with 6 seconds left, so it was a little bit closer than it seemed. West Virginia had 9 wins last year, and one of their losses was on a Hail Mary to Houston, so they were right on the edge of being a 10-win team. They returned 68% of their production, notably starting quarterback Garrett Green and running back C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White, so very, very solid team that I think can make some noise not only in the Big 12, but potentially in this game too. Just like the Mountaineers have a returning starting quarterback and dynamic duo in the backfield, Penn State is the same way. They return Drew Aller at quarterback and then running backs Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, who are touchdown threats on any given play. So should be a very exciting game. It's at noon on Saturday, same time as Clemson, Georgia, and a couple other solid games. So if you're checking scores or just flipping between games and it's the third quarter and West Virginia is within one possession or even has the lead, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility at all, and could even see the Mountaineers winning this game. Some of the other notable week 1 matchups, we've got North Carolina at Minnesota, 8 o'clock on Thursday night. That is the first Power 4 versus Power 4 non-conference game of the season. In week 1 of last year, Minnesota beat Nebraska at home on a walk-off field goal as time expired. Pretty exciting way to get the season started last year, so they'll try to replicate that on Thursday. North Carolina is replacing Drake May at quarterback, but returns star running back Omarion Hampton, who had the 5th most rushing yards in the FBS last year, so should be a fun matchup. Also on Thursday night, what could be a sneaky good game is North Dakota State at Colorado, 8 o'clock Eastern on ESPN. I made a post about this a while back in the offseason, but the FCS Bison have won 6 of their last 7 games against FBS opponents, going back to 2010. And one of those was a win over number 13 Iowa in 2016. So they've been a dynasty in the FCS. They're frequently in the national title game, if not winning it almost every season. So if Colorado hasn't gotten things turned around from their 4-8 season last year, or even if they are somewhat improved, North Dakota State may pose a significant threat. The nightcap on Friday, we have TCU at Stanford, 10:30 p.m. Eastern. That's Stanford's first game as an ACC team, which is going to take some getting used to. But the Cardinal returns 85% of their production from last year, which is the second most of any team in the FBS. So a lot of experience on that roster. They're a 9-point underdog to the Horned Frogs, but I really wouldn't be surprised if Stanford won that game. South Dakota State at number 17 Oklahoma State on Saturday. This is a close spread that I think might catch some people off guard. Ollie Gordon, who led the FBS in rushing yards last year, and the Cowboys are just a 9.5 point favorite at home over the FCS Jackrabbits. South Dakota State went 15-0 last year and won the FCS national title. They absolutely steamrolled their way through the FCS playoffs. They won their second round game by 41, their semifinal game by 59, and the championship game by 20. It was a bloodbath in the FCS bracket last year. They were far and away better than every other team in that part of Division I football, so definitely keep an eye on that one if you're checking through scores throughout the day on Saturday. Southern Miss goes on the road to Kentucky. That's 7:45 p.m. Eastern on the SEC Network. Kentucky's a 28-point favorite. They're a 4-touchdown favorite. But as we saw in Week 0, you can't always trust the spreads, especially at this point in the season when there is a lot of unknown from team to team. But SMU was a 28-point favorite. They trailed by double digits going into the fourth quarter against Nevada. Florida State, of course, they were a double-digit favorite, outright lost. Montana State was a 14.5-point favorite. They trailed by 17. So definitely can't trust the spreads at this point in the season. But one major thing about this Southern Miss at Kentucky game that caught my eye was I remembered back to 2016, Southern Miss went to Kentucky, a game where they were an underdog again, of course, and that was a game Kentucky led 35-10 in the second quarter, and Southern Miss ended that game on a 34-0 run to win 44-35. They trailed by 25 in that game and ended up winning by 9 by 2 possessions. So not to say that's going to happen again, but just an interesting historical note between those two teams. And who knows, potentially there could be some upset potential there. Another game to watch on Saturday, or to at least keep an eye on, is Georgia Tech hosting Georgia State. And now this is a game that probably wouldn't have been on the radar had they not won that Week 0 game, but they did, and in beating Florida State, they continued that pattern that I mentioned in last week's episode and at the beginning of this one, where they really perform well against their highly ranked teams in games where they're the underdog, but when they are the favorite and are facing teams that they're kind of expected to beat, they don't really look as impressive. I've used the example a couple times, but they lost to Bowling Green by 15 last year and then beat 2 ranked opponents in Miami and North Carolina in just a couple weeks after that. So they beat number 10 Florida State. Will they come out with momentum from that win against Georgia State, or will they kind of follow that pattern and not look as impressive this week? Definitely one to keep an eye on. Wyoming at Arizona State, 10:30 p.m. on FS1. Arizona State is just about a touchdown favorite. We've got Coastal Carolina going to Jacksonville State. I think that's actually on Friday, or no, Thursday night even. Coastal Carolina goes to Jacksonville State, 8 o'clock on CBS Sports Network on Thursday. Jacksonville State is a 2.5-point favorite. Definitely could be a close game there. We got Virginia Tech at Vanderbilt. The Hokies have a lot of hopes for this season, more than they've had in Blacksburg in quite a while. I know a couple people picked them outright to win the ACC title, to go to the college football playoff. They've got an electric quarterback in Kyron Drones. So on the road in week 1 at Vanderbilt, that's noon Eastern on ESPN on Saturday. So definitely a watchable game there as well. We've got Kennesaw State's first game in the FBS. They go to UTSA. That's 3:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN+. UTSA is a pretty big favorite, but be interesting to see how Kennesaw State does in their first game since moving up. There's also UCLA at Hawaii. That's 7:30 p.m. Eastern on CBS on Saturday. UCLA is a 13.5-point favorite, and Hawaii is already played, which I like to watch these matchups between, especially like a Power 4 team going to a G5, but also Hawaii's already played. They already beat Delaware State by 21. They won 35-14 in week 0, so they've already gotten those first game jitters out. They already have a win. They've already got a little experience in 2024. They get a home game with UCLA coming to them, and it's a 2-touchdown spread. So, and as I mentioned, can't really trust the spreads at this point in the season. That one could be very interesting. And lastly, the standalone Monday night game, we've got Florida State hosting Boston College. It'll be interesting to see how the Seminoles can bounce back from that week 0 loss to Georgia Tech out in Ireland. And one thing I'm very interested about in this game is Florida State had a lot of trouble in week 0 containing Haynes King whenever he would run. He had like 15 carries, I think, for 50 yards or something in that game. And he was not only eating them up through the air a little bit, but also on the ground. And if they were having trouble containing him, then Thomas Castellanos, the Boston College quarterback, may really be able to have a big day on Monday. Last season, he led Boston College in passing, of course, but he also had 1,100 yards rushing and was their leader in rushing on the team. So definitely something to watch out for there. In last year's bowl game against SMU, Castellanos had 153 rushing yards, which is the most by a Boston College quarterback in a bowl game in program history. So he's already been making some noise there. He transferred from UCF to Boston College last year. He's in his second season with the Eagles, and could be in for a big game on Monday night if he's able to scramble a little bit and cause some troubles for Florida State as a dual threat. As I mentioned at the beginning, Florida State's going to be really intriguing to watch, at least for the next couple weeks, just to see how they're able to respond to that loss in Ireland. And They had a ton of hopes coming into the season. They were preseason top 10. Everybody had them in, either the ACC championship or the playoff. I actually had in neither, but they had such lofty expectations for this season, and they had 13 wins last year, trying to get the program back to into the national stage every year, and not the way that they wanted to start the season, of course, but everything that they wanted to accomplish this season is still in front of them. So it'll be interesting to see if they can put that game in the rearview mirror, focus on what's ahead, and get back on track. And before we end it here, I just wanted to shout out Ball State real quick. If you don't know, Ball State, I believe, is the only team in the country who will not have played after this week. They start their season week 1 with a bye week. So their first game will be next Saturday, September 7th. But they're, I think, the only team that did not play in week 0 or will not play in week 1. That's going to wrap it up. Really appreciate you tuning in today. Week 1 is going to be a ton of fun. 5 consecutive days of college football, and I'm really looking forward to it. So make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Follow CFB Kings on Twitter and Instagram if you currently aren't. And make sure to come back next time for some more college football content. Thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and take care.